What if the biggest threat to the 9 to 5 is not robots in factories, but software on laptops? Not loud machines. Not sci-fi androids. Not some cinematic takeover. Just AI tools quietly sliding into offices, inboxes, dashboards, CRM, calendars, spreadsheets, support desks, design apps, code editors, and meeting notes. That is the shift happening right now. And it is much more unsettling than people want to admit. Because the old picture of automation was simple. Machines replaced physical labor. Humans kept the thinking jobs, the desk jobs, the white-collar jobs, the jobs with meetings, documents, reports, approvals, planning, communication, and judgment. That wall is starting to crack. Not all at once, not evenly, but visibly. And the reason is that AI is no longer just doing isolated tricks. It is starting to eat workflows. That is the part that matters. A lot of people still talk about AI like it is just a better autocomplete, a smarter chatbot, a faster search box, a tool that drafts an email or summarizes a PDF. But the real disruption begins when those tools stop helping with one task and start connecting multiple tasks into a chain. Read the message, summarize the issue, check the account, draft the reply, update the record, schedule the follow-up, generate the report, notify the team. That is no longer one helpful feature. That is a piece of somebody's job. And once enough pieces connect, the shape of the work changes. That is why the phrase destroying the 9 to 5 sounds dramatic, but it is not completely wrong. Because what AI is really attacking is not work itself. It is the old structure of work. The predictable schedule, the repeated admin, the stack of tasks that justified whole roles because they used to require a human being to move them from one step to the next. That is where the pressure is building. Think about how much of office life is really made of fragments. Replying, reformatting, summarizing, scheduling, copying information between systems, preparing updates, checking status, writing first drafts, comparing documents, searching internal knowledge, sorting requests, translating messy requests into clean outputs. A shocking amount of knowledge work is not deep genius. It is structured friction. And structured friction is exactly what AI tools are getting better at removing. That is why this wave feels different. It is not just that one person can use AI to save 10 minutes here and there. It is that companies are starting to realize whole chains of work can be reorganized. Not one task faster, the whole workflow redesigned. That distinction changes everything. Because once a workflow gets redesigned around AI, the role built around the old workflow starts to wobble. Maybe the job does not disappear instantly, but it mutates, it narrows, it speeds up, it requires fewer people, or it shifts upward into supervision, exception handling, and final judgment. That is how the destruction happens in real life. Not always with a dramatic firing wave. Sometimes through quiet compression. One team that used to need 10 people now needs 6. A coordinator role becomes part-time. A junior role never gets rehired. A layer of admin vanishes. A department keeps the same headcount for a while, but suddenly everyone is expected to produce far more. The 9 to 5 does not always explode. Sometimes it gets hollowed out. And honestly, that may be more destabilizing. Because it is harder to point at, harder to fight, harder to emotionally prepare for. You just wake up 1 year later and realize the job still exists, but the logic of the job has changed. That is already happening across email-heavy work, customer support, reporting, research, content production, software, operations, and internal coordination. AI tools are stepping into the seams, and the seams were where millions of people lived professionally. Now, to be clear, this does not mean every job is vanishing tomorrow. That kind of talk is lazy. The smarter way to understand this is that AI is attacking the routine inside roles before it fully attacks the roles themselves. That is a critical difference. If a role is made mostly of repetition, templates, predictable responses, standard research, document handling, low-level analysis, scheduling, or transformation of one format into another, AI tools can already put serious pressure on it. If a role depends more on trust, ambiguity, negotiation, accountability, taste, responsibility, physical presence, or deep human context, it is harder to compress. Harder is not impossible, but harder matters. That is why some jobs feel strangely safe while others suddenly feel fragile. It is not always about status. It is about workflow shape. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings in the AI conversation. People assume disruption follows prestige, that high-status jobs are protected and low-status jobs are exposed. But AI does not care about status. It cares about pattern. If the work can be broken into repeatable chains, AI starts circling it. And if the work is fragmented across many systems, many messages, many little requests, many handoffs, that can actually make it easier for modern AI tools to absorb large parts of it. That is why the office is such a target-rich environment. The 9 to 5 was built around managing information manually. Meetings to move information, emails to confirm information, documents to reshape information, dashboards to interpret information, updates to relay information. AI tools are getting frighteningly good at exactly that layer. Reading, writing, summarizing, sorting, reformatting, classifying, escalating, drafting, following policy, searching across knowledge, generating first-pass decisions. That does not mean they are flawless. Far from it. But perfection is not the threshold. If a tool can handle 80% of the boring, repeated, low-risk volume, the human roll-around that work starts to shrink, even if the final 20% still needs a person. That is enough to reshape hiring, enough to reshape expectations, enough to reshape management. And this is where the emotional side kicks in. Because what AI threatens is not just income, it threatens professional identity. A lot of office workers built stability around being the person who knew how to navigate the system, the person who could coordinate the moving parts, the person who could turn chaos into a polished update, a client reply, a deck, a plan, a report, a summary. But now software is getting strangely good at the first draft of exactly that value. And once first drafts become cheap, the market starts rewarding something else. Clear judgment, taste, prioritization, responsibility, relationship management, systems thinking, decision-making under uncertainty. That is the new gravity. The people who survive this shift best may not be the people who work hardest in the old sense. They may be the people who can supervise, steer, verify, and redesign work around AI faster than others can. That is a brutal transition if your whole career was built for the previous operating system. And that is why this topic hits a nerve. Because for decades, the 9 to 5 represented a kind of deal. Show up, do the process, handle the information, keep the machine moving, get paid, build a life. AI tools are not necessarily ending work, but they are destabilizing that deal. The workday becomes less about being present for a fixed block of time and more about managing outputs, exceptions, and systems. The role becomes less about manually doing each step and more about overseeing the steps that still require a human. The company becomes less interested in headcount for throughput and more interested in leverage per person. That is a deep cultural change. And it explains why so many people feel both excited and uneasy at the same time. Because on one hand, AI tools can absolutely remove mind-numbing drudgery. That part is real. Less repetitive admin, less blank page writing, less tedious formatting, less searching for lost information, less pointless status grunt work. That can be liberating. But on the other hand, when the machine gets better at the least glamorous parts of your job, it also starts asking an uncomfortable question. What exactly are we paying you for now? That is the question hiding underneath all of this. Not will AI take every job, but which parts of your work still justify a human in the loop once the repetitive layer gets stripped out? That is a much sharper question, and much harder to dodge. Because for some people, the answer will be obvious. They own client trust. They make judgment calls. They navigate politics. They carry accountability. They solve weird edge cases. They set direction. But for others, especially in roles that were built around task throughput, coordination overhead, or repetitive information handling, the answer may get uncomfortable fast. That is why I do not think the biggest story is total replacement. I think the bigger story is compression. Compression of teams. Compression of roles. Compression of junior ladders. Compression of time. Compression of how much human effort is needed to keep the office machine running. And once that compression gets strong enough, the 9 to 5 starts to look less like the default structure of adult life and more like one temporary phase in the history of work. Maybe some people end up managing multiple streams of AI-assisted work instead of holding one classic full-time role. Maybe one worker with strong AI systems can outperform what used to be a small team. Maybe certain categories of white-collar labor become less about attendance and more about bursts of oversight. That is the direction of travel. And whether people find that thrilling or terrifying will depend a lot on where they are standing when the wave hits. So yes, AI tools are destroying the 9 to 5, but probably not in the cartoon version people imagine. Not by erasing every office overnight. Not by replacing every worker with one machine. But by steadily dismantling the old logic of repetitive professional labor. By eating the workflow. By compressing the middle. By changing what companies value. By forcing humans upward into judgment, strategy, exception handling, and trust. That is the real disruption. And if you want to understand the future of work, that is the question to watch. Not just what AI can do, but what kind of work structure still makes sense once it can do it. Because once that structure changes, the 9 to 5 does not need to be officially declared dead. It just stops being the thing the system is designed around. And honestly, we may already be closer to that moment than most people realize.